So today's case, I find it very interesting. This takes place in Melbourne, Australia. Have you guys heard of the Frankston Serial Killer? It's a transsexual serial killer that has a deep hatred for women. So the crimes happened between the summer of 1993, and this person was just out to get young women. This person had evil in their heart, and they were just targeting women at random. It is absolutely terrifying. Their method of killing was stabbing and strangulation. And the way they stabbed their victims, it was just a lot of anger. So let's get into today's case. A few things about Paul are very disturbing. So trigger warning, I am gonna touch on animal abuse. So Paul did have a kitten in the family home, and this is where he stabbed and disemboweled his kitten. Not only that, when Paul was in school, she decided to stab another fellow student with a pencil, and the pencil was lodged in the child's throat. There was a lot of violence and violent ideations happening at a very early age. So animal cruelty, assaulting others with a weapon, it's just showing that Paul is going through something and things are getting more and more disturbing. It is common within serial killers for them to be sadistic at the very beginning, bedwetting, head injuries, starting fires, killing animals. And with Paul, she was already assaulting others, showing violent behavior, and mutilating animals. And if someone just stepped in and gave her some therapy or just really took a closer look at Paul's behavior, then most of the crimes that would happen in the near future could have been foreseen. However, in these stories, the police let us down. Everybody turns a blind eye until it's too late. So the body of Elizabeth Stevens was found on June 12, 1993. Elizabeth was staying with her aunt and uncle, and when she didn't arrive home, they became so worried and they called the police, and they filed a missing persons report. However, when Elizabeth's body was found, she has been stabbed to death. There were stab wounds on her face, on her neck, on her abdomen, and the killer was stabbing her in a crisscross kind of fashion. There was just a lot of blood, and at this point she was mutilated. Debbie was missing on July 8th, 1993. She went out to buy some milk and she never returned home. When she was found behind a local church, she was stabbed in the face, neck and abdomen multiple times. She was stabbed over 85 times. Her body was found in Curram Docks near a riverside in Frankston. Her autopsy showed that she hasn't been sexually assaulted. None of the victims were. Yet there's another victim, Natalie Russell. She was only 17 years old and she was stabbed to death. She was found on July 30th, 1993. She was cycling from home to a local college that she was going to called John Paul College, and she just didn't arrive home. She was stabbed multiple times. She was stabbed in the face and neck, and from these attacks you can tell this person was driven by hate and passion, and it was a personal attack, even though there was no connection to the victim and the perpetrator. Her body was also not sexually assaulted. So a local police officer decided to do some investigation, and this is when they found a yellow Toyota Corolla parked nearby where Natalie was found. So the police officer wrote down the registration number that led to Paul, and then they put it through the computer system where they found Paul's address. The police then went to Paul's house, however she was not in at the time. So the police left a card stating that Paul needs to call them back in order to talk about the ongoing investigation of all of these women getting murdered nearby. There was also a report of a local postman that saw someone sitting in a yellow Corolla, and this person was slumped over like this, trying to hide from whoever is walking by. Obviously, they reported suspicious behavior. So the police go back to Paul's house and they start questioning her. However, the police has noticed that Paul had a lot of cuts and bruising on her hands, and then the police officer and the detectives became very, very suspicious. So Paul was denying everything, not knowing who these victims were, that he had nothing to do with it, and when they were questioning her whereabouts, she just kept denying. However, the detectives noticed that she was being very nervous and standoffish about what's been going on. And Paul did try to make herself look like she was concerned for the well-being of all of the victims and their families, but they could see right through it. The detectives picked up the cue immediately. So with that said, Paul was taken to the local police station for further questioning, and the detectives started interrogating her until she cracked. Paul cracked because the detectives were asking for a DNA sample, and this is where Paul refused. And then everything came crashing down. So Paul confessed to all 3 murders and then was charged to 25 years to life in prison. So Paul went to trial and pleaded guilty for all of the murders. A clinical psychologist that was working on the court panel explained that Paul enjoyed killing women, and as a transsexual serial killer, he felt a sense of empowerment and sexual ideation. Within the trial, Paul showed no remorse at all. There was also an abduction about another victim that cannot be identified. However, this person, we don't know whether or not she has died because a body wasn't recovered. So Paul was sentenced to 3 life sentences, including 8 years for the abduction. Initially, he was denied parole, and she was suspected to spend the rest of her life in prison. However, the justice system in Australia works differently, so Paul did apply for an appeal, and it was granted that she would spend 30 years in prison in order to be considered for parole. However, that isn't guaranteed, but it is a possibility. So when Paul was asked why did he kill Natalie, and she replied back by saying, just wanted to kill, just wanted to take her life because my life was taken so many times. Paul also wanted to purchase feminine products and women's clothing within the prison. However, that was swiftly denied also. So my friends, this leads us to the end of today's case. I hope you find this case interesting. I tend to talk about cases that aren't very well known, and I have been getting requests covering cases like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, but it's been overexerted, you know. What more can I add to the story? It's just so well known. But I do hope you guys have a wonderful day ahead. Please do let me know who you would like me to talk about next week. Till then, stay safe and hydrated, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.